Been working in Acidity for a while now. In fact, so I took over the job in 2008. The position had been open for about 5 or 6 years. My predecessor, Gordon Johnson, had done the job for about 25 years. I met him 5 or 6 years into my job, and he goes, "So what have you been up to?" I said, "Oh, been talking about soil acidity and liming." He said, "Good luck. I did it for 25 years." So we've got a history of acidity in Oklahoma, and I want to move through some of the slides that have already been hit by Chris and John already, but I want to bring out a few points. So I've moved beyond John. I've moved beyond talking about aluminum toxicity and nutrient availability because we're getting our producers have heard that for 30 years. And I'm bringing up more of an impact on herbicide sensitivity and physiological impact. We have well documented the physiology is impacted and maturity is impacted by acidity. So almost every crop I've ever worked in, and I've got a lot of studies that I have plots. This one below has a range of pH from 4 to 8. And so I've documented almost every plot, every crop I put in, sesame, canola, wheat, sorghum, sunflower, soybean, that acidity delays crop maturity by an upwards of two weeks, depending on what you're looking at. Sunflower was especially delayed. And then the bigger thing, as we're getting more and more tolerance to herbicides and more weeds that are just such a pain in the tail, is the impact on herbicides on weed pH on herbicides. So ALS inhibitors, if we're talking about our grassy weeds for us, and this is a little bit older slide because I stole it from a weed scientist, but our SUs, this is what we use in Oklahoma to really deal with grassy weeds, our sulfonylureas. And Glean was one of our historic herbicides that we used for a long time for ryegrass and some other things. So in a high pH, we persist. So you guys will probably be used to having the persistence in high pH. But this is what really gets to. So most of the folks that I know that are applying Glean or the SUs are really wanting it out there for a persistence. But if we drop to a 5-6, our half-life of Glean goes to about 2 weeks. And it's not on here, but if we drop to a 5, the half-life of the SUs herbicides are sub 1 week. So that's meaning your residual activity for your sulfonylureas is basically gone once you drop below a pH. And so this is one of the big deals about pH. And so this is why we want to lime, because this is not because of aluminum, it's because of the hydrogen concentration. And we do have people that use gypsum in Oklahoma to alleviate aluminum, because you can block some of the aluminum-free plus with gypsum, but the pH doesn't change. So you will negate some of your aluminum toxicity, but you don't change the soil pH, and so you still have issues with things like herbicide. Our pursuits, Imazas, we got lower pH, so at a pH of 4.6, we actually hold on as we go on, so our remaining half-life is longer. And so you've really got to know the herbicide you're running and its impact. And so atrazine, so here's a big one for our sorghum and our corn growers. At a pH of 4.7, 10% control after 2 months. And so we're basically really getting at the half-life and the control that we have from our atrazine for our sorghum and corn crops. And we've known it for a long time, and we deal with it a long time on our rotation restrictions with atrazine, that once you get a high pH, now all of a sudden you start having problems with it not breaking down. And we have a big issue with our 7.2s with rotation when we use atrazine. Now getting into some of the stuff John was talking about, I've got a collection of soil samples that I've had for a very long time. I've requested grid soil samples from producers. I've got about 700 to 800 fields right now. It's about 20,000 individual soil samples, and I can look at the variability of the soils in Oklahoma and Kansas and Texas. And I know it's not your soils, but this is still kind of the story I want to tell. This is all grid soil sample data. The average grid size on these is about 2.7. The majority of them are a 2.5 acre grid. We have some 5s, we have some 1 acre grids, but the majority of these fields, 700 fields, is a 2.5 acre grid. And I want to bring out the pH. And so this kind of fit really well with John's 8 zones, is that our average range across 650 fields was a unit range of 1.84 units. The average pH is 6. I'll tell you, we had about 100 samples, so 1/6 of the samples had a range of pH greater than 3 units. And if we go down to a range of 2 units or greater, we had about 200. We had 300 samples that had a soil pH range of greater than 2 units. And at first thought, I was like, well, on the high end and the low end, we won't have the same range. If it's really low, you're low. If it's really high, you're high. And until we break over 7.5, we have a wide range of soil pH in field. So what we've done here is get a field composite and compare it to the highest and lowest of the field. So this field right here, I'm looking at right here, the field composite had a 5.7, but it had a unit range of 4. I've gone to more than one field in Oklahoma where on the hill slope where we're eroded down, or the top, we are eroded down to subsoil, we might have a 7.5 to an 8, a 7.5. Down in the bottom where we have more erosion and we have more topsoil, we'll go down to a 4. And I've seen it more than once. So this gets into, I do a lot of grid and variable rate and stuff. And for us, I'm not a great component of grid soil sampling until it comes to variable rate. Grid soil sampling is expensive, but so is liming. And so how do we, if you're interested in grid soil sampling, how do you select which fields to grid? How do you know what field would have most like the greatest ROI? And so I want to work through some things we look at with that set. And it also comes by how are we zoning our fields? Can we use zones to determine some of those ranges? And so if I look at all my fields, here's our correlations. I forgot to move these bottom up. Our correlations of soil pH and CEC, organic and CEC, Malic 3 and, CEC and pH, organic and pH, Malic 3, phosphorus and pH. This is our Brapian pH, potassium and soil pH, calcium and soil pH, and magnesium and soil pH. Don't have just a ton of absolute like correlation, but we do have looking at, there might be some. So we look at, can we use calcium? And so I put this here. Oops, sorry. Calcium had the best correlation with pH, but I can't find a critical threshold with calcium because guess what? Even at an 8, I have calcium levels at 2,000 ppm, and I do so for below the 5.5. The 4s down here still have 1,000 ppm, but we still have 1,000 ppm of 7.5. So I can't use it as a guide to whether or not I can or cannot sample, or should not sample because I have acidity. Here's calcium right here. You can see our high plains. This is our high plains panhandle where we have the higher pHs and wind-blown calcium carbonate deposits where it goes higher, but we can't really use calcium to correlate. What we can do, this is what's been interesting, this is why this data set works, and I think it'd be something to look at, is I can look at the field composite pH and determine the probability that I have enough ground below my lime target to lime. So this graph right here is the field average composite pH graphed against the percent of samples below 5.5, because really it's only going to pay to do variable rate if I have variability in my field, and the highest fields are those that need some lime or no lime. If I can really get into that percent of field that pays, that has some lime and no lime, I could look at saying, okay, this field is going to pay. And so I can actually say that if I have a composite of a 6, I'm going to drop one more down. If I have a composite pH of a 6, the curve sets at right here. That means about 30% of the field will be below, or I'm sorry, above, and the rest will be above. So as I move up, or below 5.5, but if I move up the curve and say, if I'm at about a 5.7 composite, that means for our soils, 40% of the sample will be below that 5.5, meaning it will get lime. So if you really look at that, it's like, man, those fields will pay. And I start looking at this, like, what point do I look at a composite and say, this field will pay for a grid? And for our soils, it's in this 5.5 to 6 range. I'm really investigating those fields to go a little bit further and say, okay, this field will pay for more intensive sampling beyond a composite. If it's above a 6, I'm not going to sample it. It's not going to provide opportunity for return on investment. If it's below a 5, I'm probably not going to grid sample it because it just needs lime. And so we look at it in that range. I do want to bring this out. I think this is an extremely important message to share is why is lime the most accurate variable rate? It's more accurate than phosphorus, more accurate than potassium as far as soil testing. It's extremely accurate because of what John mentioned. Let me go here. Because what John mentioned, it's a buffer index. That's the core method is actually putting a calcareous solution, a high pH solution in the soil, and we're seeing how the soil reacts to the lime. There is no other soil test procedure that we use commonly in labs that is so good at determining how your soil, the soil from that sample, will respond to lime. And so when we start talking about the accuracy of VRT and rates, man, it is all about that score and the buffer index that provides us an amazing ability to know what lime is needed. Moving through just a couple examples, so pH of 5.8, this is the kind of field I love grid sample. My pH is on the realm of liming or no liming. My composite phosphorus is right at 100% sufficient. We go at 32.5 is 100% sufficient. And so we don't have a lot going on as far as a composite. But if we look at the grid, we go from a 5.1 up to a 7.6 on our grid. Our lime looks like this. We have this. We create a variable rate lime map that looks like this. So we have part of the field that needs it, part of the field that does not. We want to share that with phosphorus, and the phosphorus variable rate map looks nothing like the lime map. I do a ton of variable rate maps based upon grid soil samples, and very seldom do you have any of them that match. VRT, VRKP, lime, they're all independent because they're independent variables, as that correlation curve mentioned before. Just some quick stuff to lime. Here's my thing. I don't know how you guys deal with it. Our average lime cost is $20 to $30 per ton applied. That's ECCE. You guys have a much different realm, so you really got to look at putting it in the right place at the right time, which adds more value to your soil sampling and more importance there. I'm going to move through this for time, but in this case, the cost of the grid would have been offset by the savings of about $5,000 using these things. Another field, 104. I'm going to move through just so you guys can see my pH, my buffer index. Oh, by the way, the composite on this was a 5.3. This is one of those fields that almost not lime or grid because it's so low. Here's my pH. Here is my lime map. And so you see that we don't have a ton of variability, but there are parts of the field that doesn't get any lime. Here's the variable rate phosphorus map for that field. We then go in and look at I'm trying to scroll through my lime and the VRT. VRT lime is tons. So the flat lime would have cost me this flat rate off a composite. The variable rate saved me a fair amount of money. And so again, for me, I don't recommend grid soil sampling for any of the nutrients, but I do recommend grid soil sampling for pH. And I'm just going to move through this and move in to open up. Got a lot of questions. Oh, this did not pop up correctly. I apologize. I want to move through one. Let me fix this real quick. So on the back side there, you're supposed to see it. Anyways. All right. So banding phosphorus. We've been banding phosphorus since the 90s. It's a great alternative. It really helps if you're growing for forage. If you're using a aluminum tolerant cultivar of wheat along with that, it really helps. Preference is DAP over MAP. DAP dissolves at a higher pH. MAP dissolves at a lower pH. So we have a better masking of the aluminum. We have a better tie-up of the aluminum with DAP 1846.0 than we do with MAP 1152. Here's our Pell lime. I do not recommend the banding of Pell lime. Why? These two pictures right here were taken, let me go back, I apologize, taken after wheat harvest. So they are banded with the drill in seed furrow and sampled 1 month after the wheat came off in June. So planted in end of September, harvested mid-June, sampled in July, and you still see that granular pellet there, and this was year 1. This was year 2. We're not getting distribution. Romulo Lovato looked at the distribution of this, and that pH is distributing about 1/16 to 1/8 inch away from the pellet. That's the only zone it's impacting. At least with the DAP and the DAP, we have a bigger plume around that's influencing the aluminum toxicity. How's acidity? It's already been said. It's all about this. I put this up there because we got a lot of people that sell liquid calcium, which is calcium chloride. Calcium chloride does not change the soil pH. pH stratification. One more note, we have a lot of now 15, 20-year no-till. We've stratified organic matter. We've stratified phosphorus. We've stratified the pH when we apply nitrogen. We also stratify aluminum. And interesting enough, John, if you look at it, our 1 inch has very low aluminum because our organic matter is so high, but the second you go to the 2 inch, it's completely offset because our organic matter goes down and we're no longer complexing the aluminum at that depth. So you see that correlation between OM and AL. This is another location, 10 years of no-till, 10 years of applying P&K. We see the same trends. P is stratified, organic matter stratified, pH is stratified, and aluminum is also stratified. With that, I got a ton of stuff, and I apologize for going quickly, but like I said, I've done a ton of pH work, got a lot of talks, and I was really trying to narrow it down to what would be beneficial for this group.